everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to People Matters TV show. This is our third edition. It's a pleasure to welcome you all for this weekly program, really with the intention to bring leaders from across the region, to bring perspectives, ideas, and practical examples about how we raise the bar for our community and how we make HR more mission critical. Today, it's all about analytics. I think it's a theme, it's a topic that is very close to everyone's heart, and there is a huge gap between what we say we do in analytics and what we actually are able to implement in our organization. So it's a pleasure to welcome Fermin Diaz. He's the Deputy CEO and Group Director at National Council for Social Service. Fermin, a very warm welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. And we have Chitang Leong, CEO at Engage Rocket as well. Chitang, very warm welcome to the show too.
Thank you for having me, Esther.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what we're going to do is we've set together a set of questions that we thought will be really practical and relevant to all of you. But you will also have the opportunity to ask us questions as we go through the show. So I invite you to use the right side corner of your screen. You'll see a chat, a group chat there. Please do keep posting questions, and I promise you that I'll take as many as I can as we go through the show. So let's start with the first question to both of you. Fermin, you've been obviously working with client organizations, and now as an HR practitioner, you've written books about human capital, you've written books about remuneration, now you're actually writing on a book on HR analytics, and you have tremendous experience in working with current organizations that you work with, but also with clients that you have done with your consulting experience. If you were to help us earmark the top challenges that you see for implementation of a HR analytics strategy, what will be the top 2-3 challenges? And I'm going to come to you, Chitang, as well, to add onto those as well.
Top 2 or 3 challenges, I find that, if I were to think of the main thing is how do we get our HR professionals, people who are currently working in HR, to think more analytically, to learn to think analytically.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the folks that are currently in HR made it into HR with a different set of strengths in the world that they found when they came into the profession. And the world changed without letting them know. And now the world has quickly gone to AI and has quickly gone into much more analytical prowess and data availability than we ever had. And yet we still rely on our guts to try to make decisions on HR. And so a typical argument would go, well, I don't need AI because I know how to recruit. I've been doing it for 20 years. Yeah. And I can tell within 5 minutes who is a good candidate and who's not. Well, if that was always true, within 5 minutes you would end the interview and make a decision. Yeah. It turns out that all of the research that goes into this has seen that the probability of success of doing interviews the old way is about 50%, slightly short of 50% or 48%. So you might as well flip a coin next time you're going to interview somebody and pick heads you hire and tails you don't. You'll be right 50% of the time. So our ability to increase our hit rate, our ability to deliver for the business better is key. And what I think, if you're going to ask me what is the key thing, yeah, that our folks that are doing HR, maybe 10 to 20% have made the switch, but there is a large 80% coming behind them that still don't quite understand what is the buzz, what are we trying to do, and how am I going to do my job differently.
Yeah. So I'm going to come to you, Fermin, on that as well. So your main challenge is about making the shift to think analytically. That would encompass the number 1 challenge. Chitang, you work as a CEO of Engage Rocket. You work with many organizations to help them really get access to engagement data, to really take decisions, C-suite leaders, HR professionals, to make decisions, informed decisions, to really develop their organization and culture and increase performance. So what have you seen as the number 1 roadblock, if I may say, besides the shift of thinking analytically of the mindset? What are the other challenges that you've seen?
So I think what Fermin mentioned is the big blocker.
Yeah.
the flip side to that is that for the people that do think analytically,
yeah,
they might not have the same level of empathy as HR. And a very recent case, a tech company, I won't mention which one, but I think everybody would know, found that one of their algorithms were systematically biasing against women in hiring. And this was not a problem at all for the data scientists involved. But obviously, when you take a human lens and apply it to the data, you then see that actually that's not okay. So there are really two sides, and they're very big pieces to fix before we can really move this forward. And I had a conversation the other day talking about, is there anybody that exists that has good capabilities in both data science and HR? And actually, we could count the number of people were like that on one hand. And I think once you fix that, then there are still other challenges to overcome. Like number one, like data silos. You find, for example, I guess more like some of the HRMS software out there today capture a lot of operational HR data, and they serve as that single source of truth for operational HR data.
Yeah.
When you join the company, how much you paid, how many sick days you have left, and so on.
Yeah.
And yet, when it comes to the leading indicators of those operational metrics, the experience side of HR or the employee experience, it's in many different silos. You have your employee engagement survey results in one silo, and then you've got your developmental needs assessments in another silo, and it's just impossible to put them all together in a coherent way to analyze. Yeah. And that's a real pity, because the operational data tells you the what is going on, but it's lagging. To dig deeper, to find out why, you really need to look at the experience data in a more holistic way. So I would say that those are two major challenges that we've seen.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chitang. So we have, on the one hand, we have all the mindset or the thinking or the transforming, and really I love what you mentioned, Chitang, about being able to balance between an analytical mind and also a business mind or a human mind, and at the same time being able to look at the process and the data and look at the whole picture in a holistic way, and that's a big challenge as well. So Fermin, how do you, and because you're writing this book and I'm so looking forward to reading it, how is your approach?
So am I.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Halfway through, yes.
So as I understand, the book actually does cover a step-by-step or a methodology to be able to transform that shift. So can you tell us some of the fundamental steps to shift from an organization that it's more gut feel to really an organization that it's more balanced?
Happy to do that. Start with the mindset, and I'm going to put a practical spin on what Chitang said. The idea, I think, is in any analytical model, when you look at it, you're creating an equation. It's statistics. And statistics basically is of the form of an equation that solves for Y, solves for the independent variable.
Yeah.
The way to achieve this balance and the way to actually make our conversation about analytics useful to the line is to put the Y variable, the independent variable, as a business variable. That variable should be profits, revenue, market share, something that business is interested in.
Yeah.
When we make the Y variable a business variable and the X variable or variables HR variables, that is truly when we can explain business results from HR interventions. In the end, that's what we as HR professionals want to do with HR analytics. How do we help the business improve through better HR practices?
Yeah.
So the first and most important premise, and just to Chitang's point, is to make the Y variable a business variable. If you make your Y variable HR, it only helps HR.
Yeah.
So when you look at causes of turnover, that is still HR doing its job.
Yeah.
When you look at impact of turnover on business results, then you're helping the business. So that's the first premise. Making a variable a business variable.
Yeah.
From there, the way we talk about it in this book that you so kindly have pointed out is 8 steps. And they go through a bit of what we've been talking so far.
Yeah.
The first step is defining of that business problem, is defining of that Y variable as a business variable.
Yeah.
The second one, and this is a very important one, and perhaps the true essence of analytical thinking, which many people think it's about the maths or the statistics, but in my view, the real core of analytical thinking is hypothesis, is building hypothesis, is formulating a hypothesis, is being able to look at a chart or a graph that says, I don't know, tenure compared to retention or age, and look at it and look at the patterns and go, what could be happening here? Could it be that we have a recruiting problem, or could it be that, and formulate that hypothesis?
Yeah.
That is the essence of analytical thinking. If you can do a hypothesis properly, then that will help you figure out what data is it that you're going to need. And by the way, this is another, I think, myth about HR analytics, that big data are so complicated. In fact, 99% of what we do in HR does not require big data, does not involve big data, and doesn't even need SPSS. Most of the stuff we do, truly, with Excel and Tableau, you got everything you need. Of course, if you have better than that, if you have SuccessFactors or if you have, Workday, great, even better. But truly, you don't need much more than that.
Yeah.
Then you analyze your data. You analyze your data that says, can I really answer the question that I posed in the hypothesis?
Yeah.
Then the 5th step is, once you analyze that data, what does it tell you? And typically it's an iterative process, which is, I think, another important part. It's not like you're going to come wham and the answer will appear to you and done. No, you sort of go, oh, okay. For instance, I was looking at one example that had to do with sales results in 2 different markets, 2 international markets. So we were comparing the sales results between Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam for this particular client that we were working with.
Yeah.
And the patterns were different. So you sort of created our first hypothesis was the patterns are different because we have a difference in the client. And then we went to test on clients. We didn't find differences in the clients, but, well, that wasn't it. So is it that we have a difference in the profile of the people that we're hiring?
Yeah.
And there we started to find some interesting things. And then you say, well, okay, if it's truly the profile, can we dig a little bit deeper? Can we see if it's a gender issue? And then started to find more differences. So it's iterative in that sense, that you build a hypothesis, you test it, it gives you a partial answer, then you go and you test again. And you keep on covering layers. And that's what those insights begin to look like. And that allows you then to start building recommendations as your 6 steps. I also have a 7th step, which is once you start building the recommendations, and I'm a big fan of Tableau, is how do you then build a visualization story?
Yeah.
I am a huge fan of starting my stories at the end.
Yeah.
And they lived happily ever after. And then tell people why.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of saying the answer to the problem of why our sales aren't working properly in all the countries, this one. And now let me tell you why.
Yeah.
If you start your stories that way, first of all, you engage your audience from the beginning.
Yeah.
And second of all, you are able to crystallize the key things that you need to tell them. When you start the story from the beginning, oh, we looked at this, and then we looked at that, and then we looked at that. You lose them by the 3rd slide. They're already on their phones doing something else, and they never get your punchline. So I'm a big fan of doing it that way.
Very nice.
And then the last step is the ability also to check whether the answer that you got is a good one. And what that usually means is implement your recommendation and then go measure again. Did it work?
Yeah.
Because if it worked, great. but you're usually going to find that, well, that worked, but it didn't solve 100% of the problem. It only solved 40 or 50 or 60% of the problem. There still could be other things. Or it could be that it didn't really work, so you got to go back to square one. So that is a very crucial last step.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fermin. Thanks for sharing those 8 steps. I think they're very practical. And with your example, I think we're able to visualize that. Chi Tong, I'm intrigued to know more examples of what you've seen. Again, going back to the business metric being the why, and in your case, because you work with many organizations, helping them to actually be more productive and more innovative. So give us some examples about what was one why variable and how your client organization really used that thinking process of building hypotheses and really making a difference to the business.
Yeah, this is actually really simple. So this is something that many companies face. First year attrition. So there was a company that had first year attrition of up to 70%. So what that meant was if you joined the company at day 1, say 10 people would join. By day 365, 7 of those 10 people would have left. And that was a major problem. So prior to that, they were investing a lot of energy in recruiting. They grew their recruitment team. They were paying recruiters more. The cost per hire was going up, even though they were not tracking it. And they found that half of that attrition actually happened within the first 6 months.
Yeah.
And so I guess taking exactly what Fermin was saying, asking the right question. So if we've invested so much in hiring, is this because we're hiring the wrong people and just the hiring process is broken? Or is the alternative hypothesis that maybe our line managers or hiring managers are not setting up these new hires for success?
Yeah.
So the learning loop needs to be closed very fast, because every month this company was burning tens of thousands of dollars in attrition costs.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was with a monthly survey on the new hires, post-onboarding, they were then able to find out what were some of the key challenges that they had after joining. So that was the easier thing to fix from this customer's perspective. They wanted to just test to see if this was really an issue. And indeed, what they found was within a very short period of time, just a few months, they realized that there were some elements of the onboarding experience that were just horrible for many of the new hires.
Yeah.
And things like communication of expectations from hiring managers, things like being able to help the new hires navigate this huge gargantuan organization that we're within. These were not tasks that the hiring managers knew, or at least that they uniformly knew that they were expected to do for the new hires. They just kind of expected that HR would do this.
Yeah.
And of course, like HR can't be doing all of this. It's just too much. So when they realized this, they started putting together certain programs for hiring managers around communicating those expectations, having regular check-ins with the staff. And it's still early days, but already you can start seeing the savings in terms of the reduction in recruitment costs. And there are also the non-tangible savings that you'd see from having fewer constantly open positions, having fewer people that need to take time out of their regular job to help train and retrain new people. So our own personal estimates are that this small initiative yielded that company about 17 times their return on investment for every dollar they spent on the fees of tracking this process.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for that example, Chi Tong, because I think it gives us that real life understanding. And I think because you picked up the example of attrition, I think that probably all of our viewers today are really, really close to that example as well. So help me understand, and I'm asking this question really to both of you, on what is needed to shift that in terms of, the structure. Some organizations may tend to create a a separate group which actually looks at analytics. Some organizations will say, you know what, analytics is really for everyone and it's a mindset and we need to incorporate that in a DNA. So what is it needed in terms of structures? What is it needed in terms of skills? What's needed in terms of budget, commitment? How do we really make that shift more, maybe faster and more efficient? What's your recommendation?
If I can start.
Yeah, go ahead, Fermin.
You know, I learned about this, and this meaning using data to make decisions.
Yeah.
From the marketing people.
Yeah.
You know, back in the day, when I was head of HR of a big Fortune 500 multinational, I was head of HR at the time I was head of HR Latin America.
Yeah.
And it used to really kill me that I would go to we had meetings every Friday.
Yeah.
With the senior staff. And usually, you know, the sales guy would go first and he would talk about how much he sold. And then the production guy would talk second and say how much he produced, so make sure that the sales guy could sell. And then the finance guy would go later and say, yes, sure enough, we did sell that and we did produce that and it cost that much and that was the profit. And then the marketing guy would come on and he would talk about the campaign and how campaign was driving sales. And I always thought that was so esoteric because how can he really tell? But people would have comments on, oh, I don't like the slogan, I don't like the picture, but nobody questioned his numbers. And then HR came on and we would say something along the lines of, please be sure to remember to fill the forms out by next Thursday.
Yeah.
And then people would always complain about HR. And it turns out, you know, the marketing guy was a good friend of mine. And what we did is we used to share two loves. One was for Argentinian red wine, which was still one of my loves. And the other one is good music. He's a stereophile like I am. And one night on our second bottle of wine, listening to good music, I finally broke down and complained to him. I said, how is it that you can get away with murder with all this stuff and I can't get away with anything because everybody's a freaking HR expert? And so he told me the secret of multiple regressions and net present value.
Yeah.
And this was like a revelation from God. This was truly like, oh my God, this is the trick. I just never knew. And nobody told me about this before today. And so I went to put this into practice. And the first thing I did is we were having hiring profiles issues in our Mexico operation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And basically, to make the story short, we had more than 100 distribution centers, which means we had more than 100 distribution center managers, each of whom controlled a workforce of about 100 salespeople. And each manager had their own idea of what kind of people they wanted as sales force. And of course, the HR department was going crazy because to hire for this guy, we're hiring this way, and for hiring that guy, we're hiring that way. And I was trying to tell them, you can't do that. You have to hire all the same people. And they would always come back. This is where everybody's a freaking HR expert. Everybody would come back and say, but when have you ever managed a sales force? So you hire the ones that we tell you. And of course, I had 100 different people telling me the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's when I said, I'm going to use my friends' tricks and put a multiple regression in on different hiring profiles to see which one produced better sales. And I came up with a standard set of profiles. And then the next Friday, we went to our usual meeting and we went through the same routine. Sales said this and marketing said that. And then came the time for HR and I got up and I put my chart of numbers up there and said, and this is how we're going to increase sales in Mexico. And that time, nobody said anything. No questions, no comments, nothing. And after a long minute, my division president said, okay, that's decided, let's go. Best day of my life.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the day I discovered how to do this. So I have been doing the same thing since. I've just gotten better at it. But the reality is that when you ask me, what is it going to take for people to start doing this? I'm going to reiterate something I said earlier. I don't think it's about big departments. I don't think it's about data scientists. I don't think it's necessarily about big software. I think it's about a mindset. I think it's about all of us realizing that the language of business is finance. and that we need to go talk to the business in finance, and we need to translate HR issues into finance. And the moment we can do that, and we can think of analytics as our means to do that, then we can have much more success, both as HR professionals and as businesses. So I'll stop there, let Chiton go.
No, I mean, it's amazing. It's your storytelling is so engrossing. So we look forward to one more story with a glass of wine and music as well. Chitan, I mean, I love what Fermin said, that it's really not about the tools. And sometimes what we do is we invest a lot of money on maybe a very sophisticated tool, and we think that that's it. All my problems will be solved forever. And because you run a technology product company, probably you have faced some of those challenges as well. So how do you really shift that mindset from just investing in tools and technology to really realize that it is a shift of a way of doing business, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And even as a CEO and founder of a technology company that provides these tools, I'd be the first one to say that no amount of money that you spend on a tool is going to magically change your organization. No amount of technology, AI, machine learning, whatever it is that you throw at it. If you don't fix the core mindset that Fermin's talking about, that we're talking about, then all you're going to get is a lot of data swimming around, not doing anything. And it's the equivalent of a guy who's really overweight, and he then decides, all right, I really need to slim down. I'm going to buy a Fitbit. And that Fitbit doesn't work. He's like, all right, Fitbit's terrible. They're a horrible brand. Let's go and get a Mi Band from Xiaomi. And then he tries that, and it's like, I'm wearing it every day. What am I doing wrong, doctor? And hasn't changed his food, hasn't changed the way he exercises, doesn't do anything. So the relationship with tools, and to a certain extent even data, is very similar. Whether you have your data science team housed centrally, say you're a 20,000 person organization, you have a data science team housed centrally that triages requests from all over the business, or if you had one in HR, the basic problem is the same. Obviously, if you had a data science team sitting within HR, what HR then gives that data science team to do matters greatly.
Yeah.
And in 60-70% of the time, this is about, oh, let's create a prettier dashboard, or let's have all our metrics in order so that management can look at it. And that's not analytics, that's reporting.
Yeah.
And if you had this data science team sitting centrally, imagine how much effort HR would need to convince them to triage their HR project over someone from marketing, over someone from the commercial divisions.
Yeah.
Anyway, the HR department needs to think critically about how their initiatives are supporting the business before presenting that case even to the data science team, regardless of where they're housed. So that's very, very much the case. And I mean, we hope that the tools give you all kinds of different things. So if you lack, for example, enough data points to be able to properly attribute what in the world is happening to our employees based on these interventions that we're taking, because your surveys are done every 2 years, you have no way to find out. Then you get a tool like Engage Rocket, where you have something that you can actually map out over time, and you can see the responsiveness of different groups. But if you're not even prepared to think in that way, then I would say don't even waste your money. Just the mindset right there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Chitan. So I'm going to start taking some questions from our audience. So there's a question from Yvonne on the earlier example about bias, and I think that's a great. It's a great peek into my question about the dark side of analytics. So she said, how can you share some tips on how organizations can avoid getting into too much of analytical thinking and really forgetting sometimes just like the reiterative process that Fermin, you were speaking about, and really going with what data is saying, and maybe realizing that they're either adding bias to the system, or they are maybe not achieving the business objective that they wanted to.
You know, the algorithm behind the particularly machine learning, and I actually was speaking to somebody from Amazon 2 days ago about this, because there were this was something that shocked them a bit themselves. But the good thing is that when you use analytic properly, and obviously they are, it is easy to find out that it is biased, because then you can see the outcome. When you look at the outcome, remember I told you the 8th step is check, right?
Yeah.
When they go and they check, they realize that they were not getting what they were expecting to get.
Yeah.
And then they did go back and go through it. Machine learning is a bit tricky in that sense, because machine learning learns the biases. And if you had a bias to begin with, and you teach the machine the biases, they learn the biases. So that is what I heard from the gentleman at Amazon that I was talking to a couple of days back, that what ended up happening is that because there were subjective biases in the people that were basically in the end teaching the machine to think, the biases got built into the machine. But it's difficult, I think, to assume that you're going to clean biases before they get fed into the machine.
Yeah,
what you need to be able to do is assess on the back end, see if it's working, and if it is, and then go through and figure out where you fail. So I actually like what Amazon did, which is to say, hey, it didn't work. We're now going to go fix it and make it better. Because what they have done, I think, is tell the whole HR world, careful. Don't just assume that if it's spit out by a machine, it's perfect, because it's not necessarily like that.
Correct. So that going back to the iterative process of going back to the outcome and filling it back to the...
Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So there's a question here, Chitang. I'm going to start with you, and then Fermín, you can also add. What are the different stages in employee life cycle where you have seen the application of predictive analytics? And you gave an example about attrition, but some other examples where you've seen as a low-hanging fruit for HR professionals who are seeing us today, that they can actually start experimenting with that analytical thinking.
Okay, I think there are probably two different questions here. I think. Looking at the question from the chat, there's about the different stages in the employee life cycle, and the short answer to that is that every stage you can apply any kind of predictive analytics.
Correct.
From the time that the kind of talent that you search for in the market, the hiring process that you go through, all the way through the onboarding process, the engagement and development process, and then finally even the exit process to find out how do you predict attrition, so to speak, which is actually surprisingly less arcane than might be assumed. And then I think to your question, as the low-hanging fruit, this is something that we think about a lot at Engage Rocket, because changing processes in any company is extremely difficult and requires a lot of force of will from multiple different stakeholders. And when you want to implement a new process, like studying, for example, how to find the ROI on a training program that has just been implemented, then it can actually get quite hairy. So one of the things that we found is that it's this little nudging. You try to nudge the organization towards taking more active steps in creating predictive analytics. So an example would be, and we discovered this by accident actually, where we talk about pulse surveys, and everybody has all kinds of different impressions of what pulse surveys mean.
Yeah.
And honestly, when we started, all we thought it was just, okay, shorter surveys more often. And then we looked at the customers that we had that were the most successful versus those that were still struggling with the change. And we noticed a very interesting pattern.
Yeah.
We noticed that the customers that were successful, they were running the pulse surveys at a cadence that matched their own business rhythm.
Yeah.
So if they had, for example, regional team meetings where they discussed P&L, discussed other action plans for inventories and so on, if they had those meetings every quarter, then they ran the surveys on a quarterly basis. So while they were action planning on every other part of the business, when it came to the people, it was very natural. We haven't been communicating our values well. We've been finding like safety incidents in X, Y, and Z plant. This is something that we need to take into action over the next quarter. It's not a big, ambitious 5-year, 10-year action plan. It doesn't cost money to go to an offsite in Bali to fix, but it's solved in the operational meeting. And indeed, they can test the next quarter to see, did that action make a difference?
Yeah.
And over time, you'll then be able to get quite granular insight into what exactly does management action create in the minds of our people. And you can answer questions like, if I have a $5 million budget and I can decide between giving everybody free lunches for a year or upgrading everyone's office furniture, how do I do that? What kind of information should I look at? If I had data from the past about how the respective changes in their survey scores correlated with changes in profitability, productivity, and so on, I now can make an informed decision based on the data on which of these two investments would make the most sense.
Yeah, wonderful. No, thanks for sharing that, Chitang, because I think the challenge about reiterative process that we were speaking about before is that at the end of the day, it does have a financial impact. If we invest on something and then we realize that we did not invest in the right thing, that did not create the right outcome, it does have a financial implication as well. So thanks for sharing that example. Fermin, you wanted to also add some inputs on this.
Let me sort of add my 2 cents worth. Chitong is absolutely right. This is an interesting thing, but I think the question is about different life stages of the employee, how to use predictive analytics. So I want to answer that also in 2 levels.
Yeah.
One is, first stage is, are we hiring the right person?
Yeah.
How can you use predictive analytics? So that's actually what all of AI nowadays is about. But we started doing that when we were doing assessments. So it's not like a new thing. The only thing we're doing is we're putting assessments on steroids.
Yeah.
And we can now do a much better job of it, and we can use machine learning to do it and all of that. So that's one way. But he was also bringing up a very interesting topic of the ROI of training. That also allows you to do predictive analytics, because is 20 hours of training enough, or do you need 80 hours of training? Does sales performance change by the hours of training that you put in? Yeah. I used to have a manufacturing site that I was responsible for here in PJ in Malaysia. And, the HR folks, the local HR folks were convinced that you needed 80 hours of quality training to produce a change in quality. So what we discovered is that we only needed to do about 48 hours of quality training, and that the additional, because they only had compared 1 week versus 2 weeks. So I'll say, okay, that's interesting. 2 weeks was obviously better than 1 week, but you didn't need the full 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because the problem that we were having by doing 2 weeks worth of training, quality was improving, but production cost was decreasing.
Yeah.
And so that's where the folks were happy. They're going to training for 2 weeks, but their bosses were unhappy because they were out of production for 2 weeks. So we have to find where the balance was.
Yeah.
If you move forward in the employee life cycle, who to promote, it's actually not too different from who to hire, but we are not very good at using the same level of predictive analytics.
Yeah.
We are so good at using assessments to hire, and we forget that is the same assessment we should use to promote. It's interesting because if you're trying to fill the job, if you bring an outside candidate, you do assessments. But if you do the inside candidate, you don't. Oh, we already know them. We don't need to do that. No, sorry. You can use predictive analytics in sort of the same way to decide whether the inside candidate, the outside candidate, in this case, at least have a higher probability of success. So you can use predictive analytics in different stages. But I want to go back to a point I made earlier when we talk about predictive analytics.
Yeah.
It is, what is the answer we're looking for? Because again, if we are looking for HR answers to HR questions, we get one set. But if we look into business answers to HR questions, we get another set. Yeah. The interesting thing, for instance, and this is what I was reminded of when Chitong was talking about pulse surveys and his engagement surveys. another example. I'm going to give you all examples instead of the theory. The example is I was working for a retail company in Brazil, and that in my consulting days, just like Chitong is trying to do now, I'm trying to sell you engagement surveys. And I was having a hard time convincing this particular company to buy my service. And so I asked the question, I asked, do you have a customer satisfaction survey? And they said, yes. I said, okay, if you let me have a copy of your customer satisfaction survey, I will run the engagement survey for free. But you need to let me have a copy of your customer satisfaction survey. And if I come up with interesting insights, then you pay me my engagement survey. And they said, oh, yeah, sure. And they gave it to me. Huh? They didn't think I would come up with anything. Little did they know. Because what we were able to do, and this is, again, to answer the question of what is it that HR needs to do to add value. Yeah. It's not just answer the question on engagement. We need to find the answer from engagement to business. So what we did, and this is something every HR person out there can do, go talk to your marketing friends. If they have anything that looks like customer satisfaction data, take your engagement data, match it to your customer satisfaction data, and try to find out what part of engagement is linked to what part of customer satisfaction. Because then you can go to the business and say, we want you to improve your engagement score, not because HR says so, but because this is what's going to improve your customer satisfaction, which, by the way, will increase your sales by 0.5 point. And then they go, oh, really? When can I start? Yeah. That is what you want to use predictive analytics for, to forecast what would happen if you change engagement scores to the business. So I just want to make sure that everybody out there understands that, again, you don't need very sophisticated stuff. We did this in Excel.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Fermit, for sharing that example as well. So for many CHROs that may be listening to us, and hopefully, I think we are able to make that shift in their mind with a lot of examples that you both are sharing on you demystifying the complexity and you really enabling each one of us to think very differently. Now, as a CHRO, I also want to make that shift in my teams. I want not only myself, but I want to start changing that mindset in my teams. Any tips on how to transform the mindset or how to equip my team to be able to do that and really make it not something that the CHRO is driving, but actually something that is more systematic across the organization? Any examples of how we can design an intervention to make that shift, not as one individual, but as a whole team?
Chitong, you go first.
Yeah, maybe I'll dive in here because I think I was a little bit inspired by the first question in the chat.
Yes, please.
What are the top metrics that HR pros need to follow to exploit big HR data?
Yeah.
I was thinking about that question while you were asking yours, Esther, and I think the answer is actually similar to both.
Yeah.
Because I think the one small change that CHROs can make is instead of pushing for the right HR metrics, to Fermin's point, actually the top metrics that CHROs and actually every HR professional needs to be following is the business metrics.
Yeah. What's
our profitability? What's our EBITDA over the past quarter? What are we reporting to shareholders?
Yeah.
What are our what's driving our production costs? What's our OPEX look like? What's the distribution of costs between headcount, capital expenses, and so on? I think being extremely literate about what the business is reporting and matters to the business would be the critical first step. And I know, I mean, I'm just kind of teeing you up to talk about this because this is kind of your area of expertise.
So Chitong, your first ask will be just as a CHRO, just change the metrics. Don't talk about HR metrics anymore. Maybe in your daily huddles or in your weekly, always think about what are the business metrics and educate your teams to make sure that they are aware of the business metric. That will be your...
I wouldn't say to remove the HR metrics entirely. Yeah, to educate on the business metrics while looking for how the HR metrics matter. Yeah. Because you might, I mean, no disrespect to HR teams, but they're probably already tracking hundreds of metrics.
Yeah, yeah.
The big question is which of these metrics actually matter?
Yeah.
And my guess is probably 10% of them.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Chitang. Yes, Fermin.
On the more practical side, on the mindset side, so to speak, what CHROs all should be doing is, instead of asking their teams, what do you think? You ask your teams, what does the data say?
Yeah.
And stop asking the team about their opinion and get the team to find proof for their hypothesis.
Yeah.
It is not that difficult to make this shift. You just got to go away from gut to data.
Yeah.
On a less practical side, because it will take a little bit of time, I typically have a question that I ask HR professionals, and it's a two-part question. I usually ask the question, do you know the difference between EBIT and EBITDA? And they can rattle it off. They can say EBIT is earnings before interest and taxes, and EBITDA adds depreciation and amortization. I said, great, very good. Now, when do you use which one for an incentive program?
Yeah.
And that's usually where about 80 to 90% of the people go, oh, I don't know. Good.
Yeah.
Every business person knows the answer to that question, except the HR person sitting at the table. And this is a big part of the reason why they still don't take HR seriously, and they don't give us a seat at the table, because we don't speak that finance language that they all seem to talk. So one of the things I always tell my HR friends is, go learn finance. They all want to go learn more HR stuff.
Yeah.
Tell them, hold the urge. Before you even go learn about Python and R, go learn finance.
Yeah.
Because if you cannot learn finance, doesn't matter what you do, you are still not going to be able to think in business terms. Then the second thing I tell them is, before you jump into tools and techniques, go review statistics. Go remember what statistics tools can do for you. And again, it's not about R or SPSS. It is about principles of how things work. Then, if they're really eager to do some more, I tell them, go do Tableau next.
Yeah.
Because if you can learn how to visualize data, you will be so far ahead already of your ability to do the rest.
Yeah.
Then, if you want to get even better, worry about all of these, data warehouses and big data and which software you're going to use after that. But start simple, low-hanging fruit. It's really not that hard.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I do think that HR analytics is for all. In marketing, nobody hesitates about the fact that they need to have models to prove whether marketing is improving sales. We all need to be convinced that we have to figure out, how does HR improve sales?
Yeah.
The same mindset.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Fermin, you've already covered actually my last question to both of you. I'm conscious about time, and I can't even tell you how fast this conversation has gone, and it's been so insightful and so inspiring and such a learning journey, and so authentic, actually. So, Fermin, you've already answered the question about what to do with those examples. And if I may just close with both of you saying, one thing that tomorrow morning you would advise us to start and stop. And just very, very quickly as we close the show, one thing to start, one thing to stop for all of our viewers today.
Well, I think I gave you most.
Yes, you did.
Finance, stats, Tableau.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Ask business questions. So ask not for opinion, but for data.
Yeah.
Learn more about what's out there, because the change that's now happening is amazing. And I would also say one more thing. Forget the idea that HR analytics is done by priests in black robes in back rooms with smoke and crystal balls.
Yeah.
It's done by very normal people doing stuff in Excel.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Fermin. Chitang?
That's really funny. I was going to say one thing to stop doing is actually that, to stop believing that HR analytics is this big thing that other people do, and that they can't do themselves. We can't do it ourselves. And then the one thing to start doing, actually, I think, is to actually believe that it is possible to make that shift. Because without that belief,
yeah,
if it sits on the shelf somewhere, you can go for workshops, you can go for training programs, you can watch programs like this, and still go away thinking, okay, someday I'm gonna get to it. But to believe that we, like, and you specifically, to the HR leader, can make that change in those little ways, and to start taking action on that. I think that's the biggest thing I would say, because it's not rocket science, honestly.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chitong. Thank you, Fermin, for being with us for these 45 minutes. I think it's been fantastic. We've learned a lot, and you have given us so much optimism, and I think so much of inputs and so much of steps to being able to do that. So thank you very, very, very much.
Thanks for having me.
And good to share this with you, Chitong.
Wonderful.
Real pleasure.
Thank you so much. And for all of you, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to hosting you once again next week for more conversations with leaders across the region to bring more and more insights and examples on how we can raise the bar of our impact in our community. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day ahead.